Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's Innovate Queensland Grid webinar for giving research and ideas direction. My name's Leanne Wyville from Presence Communications, and I work with Impact Innovation Group to deliver the Innovate Queensland program, which supports the Queensland Government's Advanced Queensland initiative. In the spirit of the Commonwealth Games, today we're going to hear from Associate Professor Sarah Kelly about the rise of esports and other technologies that are transforming the sports and fitness industries. Now, just while we're waiting for other people to connect to the webinar, I'm going to go through some of the tools we have for the Citrix GoToWebinar, and that will help those people who haven't used this system before. So on your screen, you should have your own control panel. You'll see the slides that we're showing, and you'll probably see Sarah's webcam. And then we have your own control panel. And just a tip, if you need to close it at any time or move to another screen, just click on that button to reduce it rather than lose it completely. Throughout the webinar, Sarah might ask you a question and you can let her know your response or that you agree with that or you are part of that data set by using this tool here by raising your hand. So if she says, raise your hand, please raise your hand. Now, just a little test for those people who are on the webinar. Can you see the raise your hand icon? Let me know by clicking on that button and I know that you've raised your hands. Great. Looks like everybody has got that, so I'm just going to drop those hands now. The other tool we have is the question box. We're going to answer questions at the end of Sarah's presentation, but at any time that a question occurs to you, you can type it into the questions box here, and we will address those questions at the end of the slideshow. But any time at all, you can pop your question in there. We do have a couple of handouts that you can download. There's been a glitch in the technologies. We haven't got Sarah's presentation to give you at the moment, but I will make sure that everybody who attends today will receive a copy of the slides. You just won't have them right now. But what you will find is some information about Innovate Queensland and also a copy of an article that was published in the Conversation this week that Sarah wrote about this topic. So you'll have something to download and you'll find that in the handout section. If you're going to download them, you need to do that now or before the webinar finishes. Otherwise, then they won't be available. So now I'm going to hand over to our guest presenter. Sarah Kelly is an Associate Professor in Marketing and Law at the University of Queensland. She has multidisciplinary training in law, marketing and psychology, and she's practiced previously as a commercial lawyer and manager. She's won awards for her undergraduate and postgraduate teaching, and she's currently teaching sports law. Sarah has conducted research and consultancy in sport, governance and marketing with industry, government and the not-for-profit sector nationally and internationally, and she's published in leading academic peer-reviewed journals. That's why Sarah is the academic lead of the Global Sports Technology Accelerator at UQ in partnership with the Hype Foundation, that's the Spin Lab. She's also the Deputy Chairman of the Brisbane Lions AFL Club, and she holds several non-executive directorships, including with the Wandering Warriors and Sports Analytics. She's currently on the National Education Advisory Board for the Australian Institute of Company Directors. So I'm going to hand over the screen now and welcome to the webinar, Sarah.
Thanks very much, Leanne. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to you all. It's a pleasure to be presenting this today. It really is such an exciting space right now, sports tech, and as we know, innovation, and to have been a judge and mentor at the inaugural Hype UQ Queensland Government Spin Accelerator down at the Commonwealth Games was particularly exciting and enjoyable on Monday. And I'll walk you through some example some examples of the teams who were successful in those pitches later on in the presentation, because I think you'll be interested, and they really bring together, they illustrate some of the key trends that I'm going to showcase in today's presentation. So I'll move through it, and then at the end, as Leanne said, we'll have some questions. So I'll look forward to hearing from you during that time. So first up, just understanding that, you know, the sports tech space, obviously, a lot of it is centered on analytics, and those analytics and platforms driving those analytics are very much around sporting high performance, injury prevention, and of course, fan engagement and immersion in the sports experience. So there's sort of, in a nutshell, the key points I want to make today by way of examples and case studies as well, and of course some statistics. And I think you'll be quite astounded, some of you who may not be across some of these latest statistics, at how big some of this growth is, and some of the amazing opportunities and challenges with that exist in this sector.
Sarah,
so yes,
you've got your screens. It could just be my computer, but do you have your screen showing?
Yes, as far as I can see.
Okay, could I just check with hands up? If you can see Sarah's slideshow, could you pop your hands up, please? Yep, so it must be my screen.
Okay.
Okay, that's good. Everyone can see you. That's good.
Oh, that's good. They can see the presentation as well. Okay, excellent. I'll keep going, Leanne, shall I?
Yes, please do.
Okay, all right. So look, as we know, you know, the consumer experience around all sectors now is very much around consumer to consumer engagement and validation of products and services. So that's a key point I wanted to make in terms of the sports tech sector as well. A lot of the platforms we're seeing, a lot of the technology and innovations we're seeing are centered on facilitating consumer to consumer communications, as well as the more traditional consumer to business communications. And what this is doing is actually transforming the consumer experience in consuming sport, as well as transforming the way companies, including sponsors and the sports, can market to consumers, and most importantly, secure the kind of data and aggregate data they can around fans. So I'll talk more about that in a minute, but social media is certainly disrupting that sports consumption piece, as are the broadcasting platforms, which I'll talk about as well. So just having a look at some of the investment levels from venture capital funds and private equity investors, as well as the startup space, that we're seeing a lot of investment flowing specifically towards the sports tech space because of the growth of the market, the growth in demand, both from professional sports around those sports analytics and high performance strategies leveraging sports tech, as well as the marketing side of sport and the sports consumption, as I've already mentioned. So the investment level in sports innovation is booming. You can see on the graph on the bottom right-hand side of this particular slide just how much. So just since 2011, we've seen investment of $500 million in these sorts of funds to almost $5 billion. And I understand the latest stats are it's more towards 6, 7 at the moment, some of these funds. And there's new funds springing up around the world, which I'll mention a little later in the presentation. Some of the key investment segments that these funds are particularly interested in, where we're seeing a lot of flow of the investment, is of course in the wearables, the smart wearables. Many of you might be wearing smart watches, smart earphones that are taking your exercise vitals and heart vitals, for example. So this trend will continue. I've just seen actually at the latest accelerator here at the Commonwealth Games, as well as in LA around the NBA All-Stars weekend, wearables now progressing into smart apparel. So some really interesting trends there. Of course, around fan. Yes, Leanne.
It seems that there's a number of people who can't see your screen. So I'm wondering if you could refresh your screen, and maybe we will need to take the camera off. Maybe it's a bandwidth issue. So if you wouldn't mind just refreshing your screen. We'll see if the slides come up.
Right.
So you show your screen, and then we might need to take the camera down just in case that's the reason why people aren't, you know, if there could be a bandwidth issue.
Right. Is that working now?
Not for me. I think apologies to everybody who's up. Now it looks like we've got something. What we have is your presentation, not in slideshow mode yet though.
How's that?
Just give it a second.
Is that working now?
So what we can see now is the slide show, not the actual, just the slides. So if we go into presentation mode.
I've done that.
Yeah, I think perhaps it could be a bandwidth issue. If you wouldn't mind just switching off your webcam, that might speed things up. That's looking good.
Can you see now?
Yes, I think so. I might just get everybody to raise your hand if you can see the screen now. Please let us know if you can see the screen. Aha, yes, rocking and rolling. Thank you, Sarah.
Okay, thanks for letting me know, Leanne, because from my end, it's up. So I'm glad we know that now. Apologies, everyone. So yeah, talking about the trend in growth in investment in this sports tech space is significant, and the trajectory of growth is going to continue at something like they're estimating, 30 to 40% a year. So it's a space that is really worth looking at from an investment point of view and a startup point of view if you're in that space. The VR, some of the technology and leveraging that for fan experience as well as for high performance training, for example, and analytics around that is a key trend. Things like the augmented reality, the virtual reality, we're already starting to see appear in relation to fan experience. So there's a lot of really interesting tech in that space. Smart stadiums are another trend that we're seeing. And a lot of that is around ensuring that there's the correct platforms and available Wi-Fi, which is actually a challenge in large full stadiums, as some of you might already know, to enable that consumer to consumer communication and, of course, sponsorship activation in real time during the live event. So again, very important there. Another part of that, of course, is to facilitate game experience and immersion from displaced fans, they're called. And that is, fans of the sports and sports teams that may not live or reside close to those live experiences. And in fact, that's another trend that sports tech around fan engagement is leveraging, not only in the stadium, but through external platforms where, for instance, FC Barcelona, the soccer club in Europe, has more fans outside of Barcelona than, of course, in Barcelona. The same with the Golden State Warriors NBA team. We're seeing a lot of that. I know in some of the large AFL clubs out of Melbourne, Richmond, Hawthorn, Geelong have a lot of fans living interstate. So, that is a key problem and opportunity for sports in this space, how to facilitate an immersive experience in real time for displaced fans. So that's been really interesting this week in particular, which I will talk about in a minute. Leanne, my screen seems to have just frozen. Hello?
Yes, I can see you're trying to click away there. Maybe needing to go down to physically click on the arrows down the bottom of the screen, or if that you've already been doing that.
Yes, that's what I've been doing.
So I can see your mouse, so I'm not sure why the slideshow is not moving over. You haven't stopped showing your screen?
No. So you can see the screen still?
You still see the screen, but we can't see the next slide. Okay, so I tell you what we'll do. I might just quickly take back the presentation and we'll flip it over again and see if that helps.
Sure.
Okay, let's pop this back. see if that helps with the screen show. Okay, now I think what we've done now is we may have lost your screens, your slides again, I'm sorry. Okay, so if you want to just, if you can bring that up again.
I have.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's stuck on stop showing my screen.
There we go. That's now working for me now.
Yes, yes, we can see that again. Now let's see if we can actually move the slide along.
Right, this one did, so I'll keep going. So we've talked about, just to recap, apologies for some of these interruptions there with the technology, but so I've just recapped on all the key trends and some of the amazing areas of opportunity in the sports tech space. And some of to give you an indication of the size of some of these investments and the particular areas to which some of this venture capital is actually flowing. You've got examples like Tencent out of China. The stock price on Tencent has been growing exponentially in the last year in particular. Tencent has just invested $15 billion in esports. Esports, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, but I'm sure you would be, is basically competitive video gaming. And it is probably the highest growth sport in the world, driven by the demand from the millennials and then the upcoming Gen Zs or under 18s. This is the most popular content, full stop, in the world among millennials and Gen Zs. So it is definitely a space to look at, and not just the esports themselves and the events around that, but a lot of the support services as well and the technology needed as that sector actually grows and consolidates. So it's sort of on the curve of becoming professional. It is professional already, but in terms of the consolidation around the professionalism of the sector. So Tencent is one to really look at where they're investing right now. And of course, the live streaming associated and the broadcasting associated with esports. Courtside VC, another example where, it's actually owned by the Cleveland Cavaliers franchise owner, investing a $35 million US fund for sports tech and media disruption advances. Under Armour as well has just acquired a wearable tech company or sports analytics high performance company, not only concerned with the high performance side of professional sports, but also the grassroots everyday consumers. So they've just spent almost $500 million on acquiring that company. The Dallas Cowboys have just announced a venture capital fund investing in esports as well. So it really is, a live trend that we're seeing. So this is, an interesting graph I thought that I threw up earlier, but just to show that trend is actually higher than 40% growth year on year, in terms of the investment in sports tech. We're seeing, of course, in the media, the sort of war of broadcasters, if you'd like to call it that. Otherwise, I think you could also call it the alliances we're starting to see as well. They're either competing or they're forming extensive alliances globally in order to figure out this merging and blurring of above the line traditional sort of broadcasting of sports with the over-the-top internet-driven live streaming of sports. In conjunction with the social media companies that are now coming on board for this. So here are some of the announcements you've seen in the media, where we've got the likes of Amazon recently acquiring Twitch, the biggest esports live streaming platform. They own about 90% of that market globally. Amazon has recently purchased them. Facebook and Twitter now entering broadcasting rights for the major sports. We've seen that with the IPL recently in India. Facebook made a bid for those rights, as did Twitter. In the US, I think in 2022, we'll see the rights of the NBA and NFL being renegotiated. So that'll be a really interesting space to watch, to see where the broadcasting sports tech media platform space actually heads, because at the moment it really is in a state of flux and it's unclear which particular business model is going to win out. But the way I would see it is definitely it's towards the aggregate provision through relevant alliances across the three, whether it's subscription and free to air, partnering up with the social media companies and the live streaming companies. So that will be another interesting space to watch. And also, I just thought from the consumer angle, because all of you in the sports tech space or looking into the investing in this space should always keep in mind the purpose around your particular startup. And by that, I mean, you know, sport is a really special space in that regard. And I cannot think of a space that actually resonates as much universally, cross-culturally, as sport. And so, you know, I think that, you know, whether it's an emerging economy you are targeting, you know, even in a social entrepreneurship sense associated with sport, or whether it's the developed OECD countries, sport resonates. And I think never lose sight of that, whether you're looking at the analytics, high performance side, the injury prevention side in athletes, or the consumer engagement side. Just looking at sport and how it's growing and where the key opportunities are, it's still very much, you can see on the pie graph on the left-hand side that $300 billion is invested in the apparel and equipment side of sport, the sports shoe side, of course. But growing areas include the events are still very strong and growing. The health, fitness and training trend is growing, where we're seeing, you know, grassroots organisation around sports participation. So again, with the wearable techs and all the rest, and the consumer-to-consumer social platforms related to sport and sports participation and coaching at the grassroots, a lot of growth there as well. And of course, in the betting segment associated with sports and the analytics around that. And, you know, we're seeing that with the rise of fantasy sports and esports, a parallel rise with those as well, because they, you know, they overlay so well with the gambling market in sport as well. On the right-hand side, I've just thrown up some of the more minor trends, I suppose, but definitely growing segments that we're seeing in sport. And I've already mentioned the fantasy sports, but there's also the media side, the sponsorship side, and with that sponsorship activation and the sorts of platforms and content generation that's needed to do that really effectively in sport. Merchandising, of course, and how to do that in an innovative way, not only through the relevant platforms and reaching the consumers, but also generating content that showcases that merchandise, for instance, and generates sales in an authentic way that doesn't appear overly commercial. This is a trend there. And esports, of course, I have mentioned already. So when we look at the global sports market, it is estimated at between 600 to 700 billion per year. So it is significant, and it is growing. It is larger in terms of relativity to than the entertainment markets. I would even argue sport is entertainment now, when we see the likes of the rise of esports. And it does include some of this investment that I was talking about earlier. Does include investment from 40 or 10% of the US rich list. So, there's a lot of attention devoted to it. So just to recap on some of the key trends we're seeing in driving this growth in the sports sector and investment in sports tech, we're seeing social media booming. We're seeing advancement in technology and the physics, the sports science around sport every day. So, sports tech that can leverage that cutting edge knowledge will be advantaged. And we did see that at our Commonwealth Games pitching day that I'll talk about in a minute, some of those startups leveraging that sports science and expertise. And of course, the IT platforms I've already touched on in terms of the live streaming, for instance, in terms of the fan-to-fan engagement and rewards for that engagement as well. Big data is obviously something, and artificial intelligence off the back of that is something no business can ignore. And of course, it's very, very important in the sports space to understand, and I suppose from a startup point of view, ensure that you own the big data associated with your venture. And by that, I mean really the volume and the aggregation of the data that you might be able to collect through your platform, through your engagement strategy, or through your analytics, and figure out how to monetize and leverage that. So there's startups emerging in that space, how to leverage the consumer relationship management system, or CRM system, is one example. Understanding aggregate data around high performance, around all the athletes in your sport around the world. These are the sort of platforms that are winning out at the moment in terms of investment and growth. So I have mentioned wearable tech. Wearable tech is coming our way very much as consumers. It's been around in the high performance and sports analytics space for a long time, but now we're starting to see it appear in the stadium, at home, and even via smartphone apps in the streets. So that there's going to be a lot more of that. I've already seen a lot of startups coming out in that space, and it's great to see because it's about injury prevention, rehabilitation. We've seen the aging of the population in many areas of the world. So there's a real scope there around rehabilitation and sports tech in that space. I have mentioned esports and the fantasy sports, and I would refer you to the conversation article that Leanne mentioned at the beginning that was published last week. The stats, when I came across this, I was absolutely blown away by the growth stats in this space. It is not something that is grassroots anymore. It is not something that's peripheral. It is mainstream and as I've mentioned, the rise in share price largely of Amazon, I think arguably could be attributable to their recent acquisition of Twitch, which owns 90% of the esports market. It's a really exciting sport, which it is now classified as. The IOC has given the nod to it to be classified as a genuine sport for the Asian 2022 Games, the Asian Games. So it really is high growth. We're seeing, I think the audience is something like 500 million people now, mainly millennials, mainly males, about 70% males, but the female side is growing as well. And the investment is growing exponentially. It is looking like it'll be about 1.3 billion invested in that industry by the year 2020. So it really is on track as the biggest growing area for investment, certainly last year, but certainly going forward. Mainly around, of course, sponsoring brands and sports, traditional sports, keen to engage and captivate that elusive millennial and Gen Z markets coming through as their next consumers, given this is, as I've mentioned, the most popular content among those generations. So the way sports consumed, I think, as a takeaway point, is absolutely evolving. It's incredible, the dramatic change we're seeing there. Media disruption I've already discussed to an extent, where we're seeing the rise of live streaming, whether it's through social media platforms or through freemium sort of platforms like Twitch in the esports and over-the-top broadcasters. And as I said, that industry really is in a state of fragmentation, where it's starting to be consolidated through relevant alliances across those platforms. Keen to aggregate the content. The trend in content from these broadcasters is, marrying up with the social media and the technology, is very much around customized content delivered locally and authentically, and ensuring that you have that consumer to consumer ability to communicate in real time. So these three things are the key for broadcasters moving forward to engage sporting consumer markets. This is what is expected. So just to recap, we've seen the use of players' data in the aggregate, as I've mentioned, being a very key trend in investment and startups. The advanced analytics as the norm in sport. Any sport that does not invest in that, or marketer for that matter on the consumer side of sport, will lose out to competition. It is creating a real edge. We now have the data on that it does create that edge in something as hyper-competitive as sport. So very important to pay attention to that space. And the shape of the over-the-top broadcasting and live streaming landscape is one to watch as well. So we've just developed a word cloud here just to summarise as well some of the key trends we're seeing, and of course the digital platforms, the fitness side and the wearable tech, fan engagement are some of the key trends we're seeing. So on that side of things, the fans, I think just to zone in a little bit more on the consumer side of sport, as I've mentioned, they're demanding a more immersive, authentic and customised experience more than ever before. So as a result, the marketer's priority is to generate that content that does resonate in that way. And it is very challenging because consumers don't necessarily want to just see the logo impressions around sponsorship. They want to see a true partnering between sponsors and the sports, and they want to be rewarded for engaging with some of that activation. I think the majority of consumers and fans are conscious that sponsorship is essential to support the very existence of sport. They're happy to accept that as long as the sponsors are engaging authentically with that sport. This is the case particularly in esports and the fantasy sports among the millennials, where the power in terms of what they choose to view, the content they consume, of course, is very much with them. So with the use of ad blocking, for instance, ad blocking apps and devices. So really important as a sponsor activating or a sport activating to ensure that that content really resonates and it's of value and it communicates the genuine relationship with the sport. Really important. A couple of other key trends among consumers of sport, of course, is that trend towards the lifestyle and entertainment value of sport. So there's a lot of pressure on sports to ensure that the experience is very exciting, engaging and social. And local content, as I said, is very in demand and does well. So a lot of the team-based sports are leveraging that very, very well. And grassroots sports, we can't forget as localised content, real opportunity there for them. In terms of the inclusive culture of sport, we're seeing tremendous leaps and bounds in that gender equality area with the rise of women's sports in the last year. This is a trend that cannot be ignored. It's a global trend. We're seeing some of the sporting codes and welfare analytics paying attention to that female sports professionalism space. And it's one the marketers are coming to in droves because they see the opportunity. They see that almost half the sports consumption market are female, that a third of participants in a lot of the male-dominated sports are now participating as players in that sport at the grassroots. They have some of the highest growth in participation rates in female sports. So it's an area that sports and marketers can't ignore, and certainly sports tech startups are not ignoring either. So we're seeing some platforms and particularly around the analytics and consumer engagement directly targeting the female segment. So something to keep in mind there. With that though, with some of these trends, we have a lot of challenges that are emerging as well in the sports sector, which I'd certainly advise sports tech startups to keep in mind. One is, of course, that the millennials are not watching traditional media. So if you, and some of you may be millennials viewing this webinar right now, but if you're not and you don't understand this, that millennials are turning off traditional media. They are not viewing free-to-air TV at all. I teach some undergrads, and sometimes you might refer to something you might have seen on free-to-air on the news or something, and they sort of look at you blankly. So that's a key point. They are watching some sports on free-to-air, But the trend is definitely around the live streaming in many of their sports. So I think that's a challenge, but it's also a great opportunity when you see the likes of esports really leveraging that opportunity, and the broadcasters like Twitch. In terms of the legalities in sport, this is an area that needs a bit of dramatic change, and we're seeing some sports tech and apps being developed addressing these challenges of, some of the contracts around intellectual property, for instance, which is always very important in sports tech developments. Previous contracts did not really protect some of the newer sort of IP that's being developed. So this is a space that does need, addressing and attention from startups, and can be a challenge when we see that things like the big data, for instance, and privacy laws evolving very, very quickly. Brands and IP in terms of the algorithms underpinning some of the platforms may not be protected by traditional IP clauses in some of the contracts. So it really is worth investigating that, because it can be a challenge to the growth and development of some of the sports tech startups and innovation in this area. Also, I think with the current trends around people wanting to only engage with customized, real-time, localized content, as I've already shared, a lot of them are starting to sort of veto some of the activations directed at them through social media by the ad blocking, as I've mentioned, but also just choosing not to engage with them because they see it as an interruption, and it's a time sap on their attention. So there's a lot of apps emerging in this sports tech space around incentivizing the consumer market to engage with the content and rewarding them for doing so. So I will show you an app in a minute that has done that really, really well. But that's just something the sports are starting to keep in mind. How do we actually monetize the engagement that we're generating through our authentic, localized content? And how do we keep our fans engaged and reward them and recognize them for those likes or those discussions and sharing? So that's a really interesting space. Another challenge, and we have seen it in the media a lot, I think with the likes of Sandpaper Gate recently, for instance, is that sports stars are not actors. They are not sometimes media savvy or fan savvy enough to understand their roles as almost celebrities, I suppose, but definitely role models in the community. So this is a real risk for sport. It's a real risk for sponsors. So it's something now that we're seeing sports tech stepping up to address, where they're developing apps to train the athletes or to facilitate consumer and direct engagement from athletes. So lots of opportunities there in that space. There's also, as I mentioned, the importance of smart stadiums for the consumer-to-consumer engagement and the analytics on that. Unfortunately, a lot of the stadia around the world is outdated in this respect, and the Wi-Fi is simply, the bandwidth is simply not strong enough to facilitate these really important sort of benchmark experience communications. So this is something we're seeing some companies spring up in the US and Europe, specializing in infrastructure in this respect. So I'm going to show you a few of the examples, which I did mention earlier from our Commonwealth Games UQ Hype Advanced Queensland or Queensland State Government pitching final on Monday. The first one is Jaro. They're a fantastic setup. They're looking at the sports management coaching side of sport. So a platform that brings it all together, how to coach effectively, how to leverage those analytics I've already discussed. This one, they've already got a lot of clients. It's a really, and it's very visual. They've got video coaching analysis facilitation as well, all in the one platform. So it's the coaching and the monitoring and evaluation all in one. Sportito is a really interesting app, and this one brings the fans at grassroots together leveraging that trend on the social media and people wanting to engage in sport at the grassroots to lead a healthier lifestyle, so that lifestyle trend. This one is currently in India. He will be expanding, and it basically introduces people to new sports, but also connects people to sports they want to play when they're in a city or region with which they're not familiar. They could be traveling. They might want to try badminton, but don't know where to go to play that, don't know how to find someone to play against. So this app brings them all together as an intermediary between the service providers and the consumer. Fan Tribe. This is the one I was referring to when I was talking about rewarding consumers for their engagement in sport. And this one is an Australian setup. He's doing very well as well in dealing with some of the sports and the sponsors in translating redeemable rewards, often through sponsorship activations, and definitely savings to the clubs and revenue growth to the sports clubs by leveraging that connectivity among the fans. So that's a really interesting space now. And of course, the aggregate data of fans across sports will be very interesting from that one. Move It is another one. This one is out of China, and it's leveraging, again, the lifestyle trend to exercising for time-poor people who are often traveling and on the run. Also not having the space in the trend towards apartment-style living around the world to have a full gym at hand. This particular device is a whole home gym in one. It's tried and proven. He has a lot of subscribers through China. It's very light. I think from memory, it's about 3 kilograms in weight, so easy to travel with. And it has won a Red Dot Award in 2017 for design. So he's doing very well, but a great idea. And again, the trend in sports equipment, that sector, the highest growth in the sports sector, equipment and apparel, that trend is not slowing down. Jetson Industries is a sports tech startup concerned with smart equipment in sport around the balls. So cricket balls and hockey pucks, golf balls as well. And it's able to collect in real time during play all of the relevant analytics around speed and engagement with the ball throughout the game. So very, very powerful. It is a proven technology. They already have extensive clients in place on that. So that's a really exciting space where you see this the technology at the center of the balls from that picture at the bottom right-hand corner of the slide. Just incredible, and it doesn't really weigh anything, and it certainly doesn't affect the physics of the ball. So their prototype is well and truly validated. BioConnected was a standout on Monday. They all were, I might add. It was a very close judging. But BioConnected is a wireless earphone that measures all your vitals. So very clever idea beyond what is regarded as less reliable on the wrist or even on the heart. The inner ear is very reliable on this front. So why not build it into the headphones, which every customer has when they're training. Coaching assist, so being able to assist grassroots coaches with coaching drills through relevant video footage of a high quality is a real space that has been underserviced. So Coach Assist is specialising in this space and doing a great job there. So where the often volunteer grassroots coach has to look for relevant drills to do, much easier to communicate this through a platform that can be shared with his team or perhaps the parents of young juniors in the team, so that they can really visualize and understand how they are to play better and improve, and they can even do their own drills at home if needed as well to really improve performance at the grassroots. So excellent, really addressing that issue that can arise through the volunteerism in sports and sports coaching. Arrival, which specialises in VR and AR technology to enhance the stadium experience and sponsorship activations, actually won our pitching event on Monday. This is a really interesting one in terms of enhancing that stadium and live experience. It can be done at home though as well. So it sort of overlays the experience with relevant statistics and messaging that is of interest to the consumer, and it is just phenomenal. So one example you can see here is that you can simply hold up your smartphone in front of the game, baseball in this case, but it could be any of the events at the Commonwealth Games we've just seen, the running, and it will show whether in fact it's a record across the league, whether it's a personal best of one of the athletes involved, all the statistics on that athlete and all the statistics on that athlete's position in the league, and of course sponsorship activation springing up that is very, very targeted and useful to the customer. So going back to that customer's ability to veto some of that content, if you're being asked, you know, would you like, we've seen you haven't bought a Coke yet, would you like one? Would you like a hamburger with that? You ordered that last time. So really leveraging the CRM to enhance the customer experience, making it a lot easier and more convenient to view the live action. So this one it's really exciting to watch this one and where it will head. Wireless timing, another great one. For those of you who might have been watching the swimming at the Commonwealth Games this week, where we've had the fantastic medal haul, this one is a great one. It addresses wireless timing basically in the grassroots swimming clubs. And there are thousands of these swimming clubs around the world, not just in Australia. So wireless timing, I think, is really ingenious. It's a very simple to use hardware and software that relates to easy timing of the grassroots swimming races. So instead of going through paperwork, which takes a lot more time at those events, they've really made it a lot more efficient, where they can reduce swimming club nights to more like an hour instead of 2 hours as a result of this technology. So they're doing very well as well. Anti is a really interesting one as well, and it's basically malleable protection gear for extreme sports such as snowboarding. And it's very exciting, that space. They're in testing at the moment, and I'm looking forward to seeing where they head with this one. And again, I've talked about the trend towards, the aging of the population and injury prevention in pro sports, so important. And so ProHab is addressing this through smart technology around rehabilitation, but capturing the data in real time during their rehab through these devices to actually assess much more accurately when the athlete is ready to participate in particular activity at any time. So that's very, very valuable to sports, and a patented development, which is great. So I did want to, conscious of time with some of our tech glitches, I did want to quickly just go through for a recap for some of you who may not have had a lot of marketing experience in the sports tech space around the consumer market and the segmentation variables that are typically used. So they're a little different to traditional segmentation in some consumer markets, where we're seeing fans, for instance, sports fans, segmented according to their avidity or their degree of fandom. So this is how granular it's getting in the sports market. So through the CRM systems, through the fan engagement analytics, you're able to decipher who is a fanatical sort of fan right down to who's a kind of occasional fan. So that's a really important segmentation base for the sports tech space. There's also a trend, as I said, towards displaced fandom. So definitely targeting under displaced versus local fans is important, as is identifying perhaps a second or third sport or team that fans may follow. So that's a trend as well, that you may not just follow one sport. You may be following the NBA league in the US, as well as the AFL league in Australia, as well as the cricket in summer and the netball. So that's an important trend as well. The ticket dynamic pricing, there's a lot of analytics and platforms being set up around that, around real-time demand for sporting events which might have some special content attached, like behind the scenes access or locker room access. So this is an example of a recent study that was done that actually profiled consumer segments among sports fans in a really granular way. And I think it's a really good example for you guys who are interested in the sports tech startup space to really aspire to. I think when you do your elevator kind of pitch on what your core benefit is and where you're headed with your business, it's always good to keep in mind and really visualize and articulate who exactly your customer is going to be, which target segment, and really name that person and understand what they're doing. So in this study, here are some of the examples of the segments that they came up with out of a very big survey. I think it was a few thousand people they surveyed, a few thousand sports fans, I should say, along examples, along segments of emotional and lifestyle segmentation bases. So you can see how detailed it is. The super jocks, young, male dominated, second highest income. So there's a mixture of demographics here, as well as lifestyle and emotional connection to sport. They seek live events. They like fantasy sports as well as the live events. They're open to sponsorship. So an important segment there. And then it goes through the other segments too. There were 5 altogether, which I've thrown them all into the presentation here for you to have a look at. By contrast, the Alumni Association segment, older male sports fans with high disposable income, heavily invested in college sports, open to sponsorship and influenced by sponsor programs. So another, very distinct segment, because of course segments, if you're going to segment that way, need to be very distinct, able to be accessed easily, able to be targeted, in other words, and very measurable. So with the available technology, the good news is this has become really easy, and that could be, in fact, your startup. So just to conclude, before we go to some Q&A, I think Dan Pink, a commentator out of the States around consumer engagement and sales, summarizes it really well, that in fact, any startup or any business, you're really engaging the customer in problem finding rather than jumping to the solutions. So when you're developing your articulated benefit and in a sustainable kind of way for your business, which is what you're always aiming for, always work with your target customers or the target segment, as I've mentioned, to get a really deep understanding of what it is they would like to see or the problem that is actually they're needing, and really get to know that before you jump to that, to market, basically. I think that's really important, to really work with target consumers, whether it's focus groups, whether it's surveys, observation. Just make sure you have that data before you go ahead with jumping to here's a problem that needs solving and here's my solution. So thank you, everyone. I do apologise for some of those technical glitches that happened, but looking forward to hearing from a couple of you for questions.
Thank you, Sarah. That you're right. It's mind blowing. You're working in this all the time, and for you, it's mind blowing. So for us to have a sneak peek at what you're dealing with all the time is certainly, an amazing overview that you've given us to have an idea of what the possibilities are out there. I was sort of listening to you and looking at the stats that you were showing. For me, it was I had a mixture of fear of we're turning into those people in the Wall-E movie.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah,
being very excited about the possibilities. I've got a question here from Lance. Are there particular sports more engaged? For example, tennis compared to football, martial arts compared to ballroom dancing?
In the sports tech space, is Lance talking about? Right.
Yes.
Oh, that's a really good That's a really good question, Lance. I think in terms of global benchmarks of where this is all headed in that fan engagement space, some of the ones you'd probably want to look at are definitely the esports. So I don't know if you've witnessed one of those esports final events, something like League of Legends, but they are filling stadia, particularly in Asia and North America. We've had a full one at Homebush, Sydney last year. There's another one coming up this year, where they filled it with 100,000 people live and something like 2 to 3 million live streaming coming on during those events. Those events, believe it or not, I can't get my head around, watching competitive gaming, but once you go to those events, they are so engaging through the sponsorship activations, because I think the sponsors have to, and the franchises have to work harder to gain that millennial attention. So because of that, it's more like a festival feel, probably even better than live music, a rock concert sort of feel. So there's a lot going on in the stadium. So I think that's a space to watch on that engagement front. The leaders, I would say, the American sports, NFL and NBA, are very, very good and really leveraging that technology. So one example I was at the Golden State Warriors late last year watching a game, and on my phone, it pops up, are you ready for your hamburger or your taco? We'll deliver it to your seat. What does your friend have? They knew that I'd come with a friend. So they delivered our food to our seat within 10 minutes. They were customized orders, the same with the beverage. They even said, we know you're from out of town. Would you like to buy some merchandise? So that before I knew it, I was buying a Golden State Warriors T-shirt. But, that's where the Rocket Man, that's where the free giveaways and the rewards for fan engagement have really started, I would say, in those American sports. So they're doing really well. But, here in Australia, I think I've just attended a lot of Commonwealth Games events, and I'd have to say the beach volleyball did really, really well and leveraged its unique small stadium in a beautiful location and a unique culture all in one. I just thought that was terrific, the way they were able to get live music going, dancing among the crowd, using the available technology. So, Lance, I hope that gives you some examples, but I think most of the sports are probably behind on this, and it would be really worth them looking and paying attention to some of the benchmarks in this space, because the news is the consumers are now expecting it. They see sport as entertainment, in other words.
Thanks, Sarah. A question here from Jan. How involved are athletes themselves in the development of tech, or are the new widgets just thrust upon them?
Oh, look, that's a really good question. So on one side, we're now seeing some of the pro athletes, particularly out of the European soccer and North America professional sports, because they're so cashed up, they are paid huge amounts of money. They're now forming sports tech funds themselves and investing in it as venture capitalists in their own right, or starting their own startups, because I guess they're closest to particularly the performance analytics side and player welfare side. So they're seeing real opportunity in that space. So there's players like, I think, the Shaquille O'Neal, LeBron James now investing in this in sports tech. And I think actually the Shaq has just been named as the managing director of one of the esports franchises in the NBA. So he's getting very involved in the esports, which is interesting. On the other side of things, how the players, I suppose, feel about that. I guess it's a real invasion of freedom and privacy to be measured every hour of the day, every day of the week, and they're measured on their sleep quality, for example. So it goes into their private life, it goes into their home. I think now they understand it as part of being a professional sports person, and they accept that as part of their contracting with the sports. They are probably seeing it, as the sports are, as an opportunity in terms of monetizing that data, the aggregate data at least, across all athletes. so in their sport or in the world around injury prevention and helping in that space. So I know a lot of them are thinking very savvily about that as well. But I think, at the end of the day, as long as the privacy protection is there and it's only the aggregate data used beyond their immediate sports club, then I think they're used to it now.
Thanks, Sarah. Look, I think we've got time for one more question. I've got this question from Ian. It's in relation to jobs. How many jobs are being created by sports tech? And this is important to him because when you're applying for grant funding, it's always about how many jobs will your new technology create.
That's another really good question. Thanks, Ian. I think that's a great question because, of course, with government funding in particular, it's all about what's the likelihood of the success of the business and the jobs the employment it will create. So that's a good question. Look, I think in general, not just in the sports tech space, but in the innovation space, and I know the universities and even high schools are now looking at this, engaging in our curricula around ensuring students have an innovation experience of some sort. So they are developing those skills around enterprise, around running their own business, around growing a business, scaling a business. So I think it is definitely the way of the future that a lot of people from now will be self-employed in their own enterprise. And the sports tech space, I've shown you the growth potential there in terms of the level of investment, in terms of the amount of opportunities and the growth of that sector. So in particular in that sector, and I think also it's overlap with the health sector, there's tremendous opportunity to enter it as a startup, as your own enterprise. So a lot of jobs, and then seeing the trajectory of growth of startups in this space. And we've been able to see it actually through our Hype partnership because they're a global ecosystem in this space. And they've seen companies grow in 1 and 2 years at 100%, 50% scaling and growth. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for employment, and you could model it on some of the case studies we've seen. Even some of our startups in the Commonwealth Games pitching event have grown in just the 5 months duration of our program. And when I say have grown, they've employed people, paid employees, not just the founders along the way. So that's a good sign that there's always prospects of employment. But I do agree it's difficult with grant applications. You do need to validate that and prove it. So perhaps sometimes it's easier to get some private funding or, bootstrap the enterprise until you can actually show that you've got, some paid employees and revenue generated.
Thanks, Sarah. That's actually a good segue into the final notices I have. So we've just gone a little bit over time, but I think people have been quite patient and understanding of that because they want to know the information. Tomorrow we're running a webinar with Advanced Queensland on the Ignite Ideas program, the round 4 of funding that's been announced. So there'll be a webinar tomorrow there, and there's still time for anybody to sign up for that webinar if you want to. Another webinar we've got coming up on Tuesday is getting the most out of Myriad. And of course, Myriad is this great celebration of all things innovation and startup. If you had the pleasure to attend any of the events with Myriad last year, you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's a great coming together of ideas and ventures and investors. So if you're planning to come to Myriad, this webinar will help you set a plan for making sure that when you attend, you get the most out of it. And no doubt a lot of the technologies that will be available to talk about or to witness at Myriad will be touching in on this big industry that we've just been looking at today. Thank you very much, Sarah, for contributing your expertise and sharing with us what you know and what you're discovering and what you're working on. It's so valuable to know that the data that's being presented is evidence-based. It's not somebody plucking figures out and posting them online. In this time of fake news, often it's hard to know what's the reliable evidence. So it's really good to be able to know that this research is taking place on our doorstep at UQ and that it's accessible. Do you have any further comments or advice for our viewers before we finish with the webinar today?
No, I mean, it's been my pleasure, Leanne, and thank you, everyone. I've really enjoyed this space, and I know you all would as well. Please feel free to contact me at University of Queensland if you want to have a chat at all. Happy to talk to you. And of course, we're running our UQ Hype Accelerator again for the next 2 years. So we'd welcome you to, if you're at that stage, the startup stage, to enter in our program. It's a great program.
Certainly, we'll be looking at helping to promote the program more once every time new details come out about it with the dates. Certainly, Innovate Queensland, Impact Innovation Group, and our whole network would be glad to share that. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in today and supporting the GRID program. We will look forward to having you online perhaps tomorrow, next week, or at our next webinars. And thanks again to you, Sarah.
No worries, Leanne. Thank you. Bye, everyone.